I am initiating a lot of conversations with a lot of companies because their data sucks. And they either do not know about it or they do not know how to address it. You present the data and someone in the room says, I disagree. And this is when your heart sinks because you realize that because someone disagrees with a number or a data point you're using, your entire strategy is just falling apart.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to Proc-N-Roll, your guide to practical procurement, where we make procurement rock and roll. I'm Zach, your host and consultant on all things procurement, and I've got Conrad with me today. Hey, Conrad, how's it going? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Great to be with you.
Yeah, and I think we're waiting for Natasha, our pro CPO, who now heads up Canada Procurement. Will be joining us very shortly. And Conrad, obviously, you've been leading Graphite, as always, one of the hottest startups in procurement. Let's dig into the episode today.
What's on the docket for today? What's on the calendar here?
Well, something completely different. We're going to discuss data today, and data readiness and for AI, how do you make sure your organization, your procurement organization is set up to take advantage of AI from a data perspective. And so I'll kick this one off. So I'm in two camps here. On the one hand, yes, you absolutely need to look at your data and clean it. But I really don't see a lot of organizations doing that systematically. I think it takes a bit of investment, and I think it's very hard to build a business case around data as well. I mean, I'm sure some people would disagree, maybe some of our listeners. But it's not always the most interesting or pressing topic at like a board meeting, like, hey, procurement wants to clean up their data because it will do X, Y, and Z. It's more indirect benefits that it drives. So I think yes, absolutely, procurement teams should be streamlining their data and having a strategy for cleaning it up over time. But I think it needs to go hand in hand with the AI strategy, right? And you got to remember there are some things that AI can do to data that, doesn't require you to clean it up. So AI is great at dealing with unstructured data. So you don't need to clean up your unstructured data necessarily, unless you got contradictions and stuff in natural text. That'll be my sort of 2 pence to kick it off. I'm on the fence around how much and how fast to go on the data question.
Zach, data quality was a topic and measured and important even before AI was talked about, right? I remember actually data quality measure being part of the first procurement organization I was a part of. This is back in the 90s, early 2000s. So as you go around and you're doing these different engagements with organizations, and Natasha, you as well, how often do you see data quality as a topic as part of the project, and how are organizations dealing with that priority in their project?
Look, every project data quality is every single one, data is a pain point. I know we need to clean up the data, and this isn't going to work without us addressing the data. And it's always, a work stream and a transformation somewhere is to look at data. I just see a lot of these programs, the data doesn't really get to, it's not the strategic enabler in many cases. There are many things that the transformation needs to juggle. Data is just one of them. And yes, you absolutely need to do it. But yeah, I think it's one variable, right, of many that determines your success on the project. I don't know, Natasha, how about, are you having lots of conversations about data and work around data?
I'm not having a lot of conversations because, let me take it back. I am initiating a lot of conversations with a lot of companies because their data sucks. And they either do not know about it or they do not know how to address it. And through various conversations, we already established that you are way more advanced than I am from AI utilization and understanding how it works, Zach. So I'm not saying it as an argument to what you stated, that AI many AI solutions are so advanced and so capable that technically quality of data, whether it's good data, bad data, structured or not, is irrelevant. So I cannot argue with that because you're much deeper expert than that. But what I remember very well from my years of being practitioners and what I've observed with maybe 30, 40 companies that I interacted in the last 12 months is that they cannot have an accurate evaluation. What's the size of the price for them? And the companies that have multiple ERPs, that have multiple P2P, S2P, various systems, and that have different measurement of like where the data is coming from, what period they're measuring, like, and I'm now focusing kind of like more specifically on the spend data. It's just there are multiple versions of truth. And I think that for companies that are focusing on the growth, or companies that are focusing on compliance, or companies that are facing significant risks, knowing where the money goes to, who the money is spent with, what kind of strategy and plan they have in place, I think it's extremely important. And when you do not have accurate data, I don't think you can plan accurately. And very often it creates a lot of misunderstanding and misalignment within the organization, because the expectations and vision of the finance side of the house is very different than of, let's say, the legal side of the house.
Natasha, you said companies don't know the price. Do you mean the price of having bad data or the price of what they're trying to buy?
The size of the price, like what's complete hunting ground. Like when you're not operating, when asking company, how much money do you spend outside of the taxes, salaries, like everything that is not usually traditionally addressed by procurement? They're often from the highest in command. I hear, we don't know.
Yeah. I mean, Zach, you said it's data's not the strategic enabler. I think I would strongly disagree with you. I do think it's the strategic enabler, but it's probably not the top line of the ROI. Like, nobody's going in and convincing the leadership, hey, we need to do this big transformation because we have bad data, or this is how this line in the transformation is going to give you millions of dollars of savings, right? Because it's like 4 clicks to that. Because it's an enabler, the things that really get excited about them, are in a different place.
Yeah, I mean, I would clarify on the data point. When I said it's not a strategic enabler, what I mean is these projects that companies do to clean up the data as part of some kind of transformation, or maybe it's like a little project to look at the supplier master, clear out old suppliers and remove duplicates and stuff. These are really one-off kind of activities. I think where you really get the transformation and where you really get the strategic enablement part isn't so much cleaning up data as cleaning up your processes for capturing data and storing it and maintaining it over time. It's around the operating model of how you manage all the data. And, do you even know what data you've got today? Where do you drive most of the value from your data, right? Like, what data points do you have today that can really be valuable for your category strategy, for analysis, your market analysis, for supplier relationship management? And so I think that's where companies need to start. See, the data is definitely you need data to be able to do everything. But you got to think of it a little bit more in terms of the operating model, And then yeah, you need good systems and processes to make sure it doesn't get dirty again. If you're having to clean your data every year, then you're doing something wrong, right? Or yeah, so I think that's just my clarification around the enablement point.
When I arrived, go ahead, Natasha.
I go as far as to say that companies miss their revenue targets because they build their targets based on the wrong data, because they're not accurately tracking consumer demand, they're not accurately tracking inventory flow. Like, if the companies do not know how to do predictive analytics and based on what data, they probably will not be able to withstand the system shock that we'll be experiencing after what we talked in the beginning of the conversation, Venezuela and oil, because it will shift the market.
Yeah,
sorry,
absolutely.
Conrad, you wanted to say something.
I was just responding to Zach's comment about cleaning the data. When I arrived at Adobe, we were in a process. We were paying, I think we were paying GEP every quarter. I think it was every quarter to go through a cleanup process, right? We would give them a file. They would do stuff on the file and give it back to us. That file would be like, hey, here's your spend for the quarter, was listed by supplier. They added some categorization to it. And then that kind of became our data set that we would use to build into the backbone of our reporting. It just always shocked me that, because what would happen, Natasha, if you had a category, Zach had a category, and I had a category, we would take those then and we would separate our stuff, and then immediately we'd be like, okay, this data isn't really part of my category. That was a mistake in the cleanup process. And so I'm trying to clean up what is in my bucket that I paid attention to. You're doing the same thing. Zach's doing the same thing. People are taking data out of their buckets. And in like 5 minutes, you don't even have the total spend anymore. You just have subsets and assumptions. And often it's with buyers and supply, category managers who are trying to fix their metrics or do their own stuff, and not with that holistic stuff, the holistic set in mind. And, maybe it's a important step to pay a third party to go help you clean up data once. But if you don't build, as Zach's talking about, the model so that your process, your operation is creating clean data. Like, you've got to go all the way back to the root cause and say, what are we doing here that's creating bad data? And those things need to be cleaned up. That's far more important than this cleanup activity, this one-time event.
Yeah, and you got to really prioritize it, right? Like, where does it go wrong is when you've got a system and a process in place and suddenly you bought a new system, or maybe your colleagues in TPRM bought a new system or somewhere adjacent in the business, and they need vendor data as well. But they go off and create their own process and it becomes their own vendor master, right? Suddenly you've got two vendor masters because you didn't consider that you needed to really integrate those and make sure that they were all drawing from one place. And then over time, this just becomes really messy. And there's so much change always going on that if you don't have a centralized way to identify all the data changes related to all the different initiatives and projects that people are undertaking, then you've got a problem on your hand. I mean, I run into some companies today. So the larger companies obviously investing in data lakes, right? And data warehouses, and there's all these fancy terms for those. I think it's the right approach. Yeah. So if you were going to have, for example, your supplier master, absolutely put it in the data lake and make sure it's the master, and make sure it's sort of all your systems are drawing from that single data point, right? The problem with data lakes is the data lake is not belong to procurement. You're just one set of data in a vast number of different operations across the business. And so getting the data scientists and engineers and the data lake builders to understand exactly what's important to you, how to structure it. You also still need to be responsible for the governance around it and enforcing that. Procurement's got to really step up to be able to pull that up. I don't see it being pulled off very well. I run into a lot of projects where there are data lakes as part of the conversation. But it just never really goes live the way you originally planned it out, right? It always becomes some other workaround, or we managed to get some data, but all our other data here is still in this system. And so yeah, I would say, like, if you really want to focus on data, take it really seriously, meticulously. You've got to have an ongoing budget to deal with it. You need to have like a data person on hand, just managing that full time. Then I think you'll start to see the strategic enablement, right? But this idea of like, oh, I'll do a one-off little investment, clean up my data. Oh, I've enabled my procurement function. No, you've just done some, bedroom tidying up, but you're not keeping your bedroom clean every single day, of the year, for example. So, yeah, it's all on how you think of it.
I think every procurement professional have been in a conversation where you present the data and someone in the room says, I disagree. And this is when your heart sinks, because you realize that because someone disagree with a number or a data point you're using, your entire strategy is just falling apart. Because the main foundation that was used to build your assumptions, to build your strategy, to build your implementation, to predict the outcome of the efforts, to justify why you're asking for the budget or tech resources, it's just all falling apart. So I think it's so instrumental for organization to have this, to operate from the same set of numbers. What are we selling? What are we buying? What are we paying? Who are we paying? What are different cost components? Where are they coming from? And because I think that every CPO has to, they have to explain to the organization that investment into building foundational data, that's foundation for accurate predictions, for accurate forecast, for accurate revenue and expense generation. And that should be important to any business. And one way or another, it is an investment. And very often, I think there's a different problem that every department within a large enterprise has their own data team and analytics team. And they use different data points, and there are multiple versions of truth. So how do we marry that there's one version of truth, but also, Zach, to what you were saying, that procurement has to kind of like get the ticket, take the ticket, get in line to pull their data. So I think this is more organizational development within each enterprise on how do you operate from the same pool of data, but make it available for procurement based on their needs.
I think it's an opportunity. Like I've been pushing like procurement should look at more technical talent, and for AI building. I think it's similar with data. Like if your organization has a data lake project going on, you're going to get assigned someone to work with procurement on that. Great, but you should have someone in procurement in your team who really understands data design, data modeling, who's worked and implemented data lakes in the past. Maybe the bulk of their experience is in procurement, but for what you need them to do, they're perfect. They can learn procurement. You need the data lake side of it, right? And you need to be able to invest in that. I'd say, look, the big thing for data for me is there's way too much data in organizations this time. So many systems, everything spits out tons and tons of data. And so I would have 3 bits of advice, I'd say, for companies looking at data. The first one is know what data is important, because there's so much data. What is really the important data to you? Now there's like core data, central data, like the supplier master, supplier name, supplier ID, the details, making sure you don't have duplicates. Like that's absolutely core data, and it's important so that you can, have a clear analysis, right, and stuff. But there are other data points as well, or that might not be about the supplier necessarily, that are really important that you've got sitting somewhere in a system. For example, if one of your projects is to increase contractual compliance, then your contracts data is going to be really important. So what I'm saying is link it back to whatever your strategic objectives are for that year, right? That's the data that's going to be important. So know what data is important. The second thing is don't introduce new data unless it's really absolutely necessary. So look at your processes and where this data is being created and where it's being churned, and who's able to create a new supplier, for example, right? What's the process for validating that supplier doesn't exist or it's not a duplicate of another entity that you've got on your master, etc. So I think you need to look at those processes and really try and go from the principle of no new data unless it's absolutely necessary. That stops the churn and all the getting lost in the noise. And you just need to have that control in place to do that. So you do need the right people, the right controls, etc. My last sort of tip is just document the data architecture. So, nothing focuses minds more than, a clear taxonomy of your data and what systems have which data points. And, I think you need some kind of documentation. And this is a live document that you manage with your team. As you introduce more systems, as your needs change, as your priorities evolve, you're always referring back to this data diagram, which tells you kind of how you should proceed.
It strikes me, I think those three are really good. I'm not sure I totally understand no new, stop the date. Did the second one don't add new data? Is that what you said? Yeah, I'm not sure how to digest that, honestly, because I think, are you saying don't add more data fields, or you say, because on one aspect, don't add new suppliers is a strategy a lot of people take. But the field and the structure and the governance is, I don't know. That starts getting more complicated, right? Just randomly creating, fields and expanding the complexity of the footprint.
Yeah, I probably explained it better, Conrad. It's what you said. It's, for example, if you have a process where someone can request a new supplier, don't let them log a supplier name anywhere until they've absolutely checked that this supplier doesn't exist already somewhere else. So you're not adding a new bit of noise. You're not introducing noise into the pipeline, because that supplier request where you accidentally spelt the name of the supplier wrong can later down the track turn into a full onboarded supplier with a slightly different spelt name, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's small things like that where you just need to make sure that if the data exists somewhere, use it. Always check for at every stage of the user journey, is this user introducing a new data point, or should they be, should we be checking that we don't have this data point already? And you should be checking that on every single step. So yeah, I agree with you, Conrad, that obviously more data points is better under the hood, but controls wise,
well, this comes to part of what you said in the beginning as well. I mean, you were like, I just don't see the go clean up the data project at the beginning of things, or those investments, because they're not strategic enablers. I'm just trying to remember how you said that. I think if you prioritize the data and you start building governance and you start building structure around it, cleaning up every bit of every field of every record in every database is impossible. Like, I just think it's impossible. But understanding which of those, what's that?
Yeah, I think it's possible. I think it's doable.
Yeah, well, there's, the sheer amount of data in the fields that are out there. Possible in a perfect world is kind of like a frictionless world. Sure, like there are ways that could be done, but when you think about this from a practical perspective and say, okay, you should be doing something, right? Your data does need to be ready for AI, and even if you're not doing AI, it needs to be ready for your operations. What should people do now? They probably can't land the plane and spend the next quarter cleaning up their data. But what are the things that you've seen to be effective on engagement you've had where, okay, I think in a different conversation, you mentioned sort of standard file names on contracts, or, there's certain things that can be done that don't require a huge investment. It just requires some discussion about how this stuff can be, how our data can be cleaned up, how we can start operating with clean data hygiene in mind instead of just random cowboy.
Yeah, it's got to be always at the front of the mind, Conrad, I think, for you to keep clean data. Because like I said, data is just so messy and so much of it gets created and it can easily go wrong. I think changing file names and stuff is like having an agreement around how you name files, or how your team names their files, and how you get those saved down, having clear organized folder structures, making sure people know where to go to get different data points, etc. I mean, Yeah, it's a tough one because I also understand the architecture landscape technologically is very complicated for a lot of businesses, and I know it's hard to always know exactly where to go to get what it is that you need. But yeah, just good data hygiene. Trying to practice that, I think, is really helpful.
Would you hire a data scientist or would you hire a process expert that can, because on the one side, it's, hey, I know how to run reports and do a whole bunch of data science stuff. On the other side, it's like, I know how to optimize your process so you create clean data. If you have to make a decision between the two, or is that just an unfair question?
I don't think it's unfair. I would say you want someone who's a data analyst. You don't really need a full-on data scientist, but someone who's also able to deal with large quantities of data and like creating structured SQL tables. Like a lot of people say I could do that pretty easily. That's one part of it, right? Like get all your spend, all your suppliers, all your lists and tables. But data is more than that, right? Data is about the process, the creation of data. There's lots of unstructured data that you need to also make sure is clean and readily available, etc. I don't think you need data science right now in procurement. Like real scientists who use statistical software and stuff. Like you're not going to be training AI right now, so you don't need to really get to that level. But you need someone who's just works with data day in day out, and usually that's not going to be someone from procurement. Because I'll give you an example. We've all done spend analysis in our early days, right? Like we all got the Excel files and created the pivot tables and the dashboards, but that's not something we do anymore, right? At some point, we moved on to other things. And what I'm saying is there are experts out there who all they do is look at data. Now, it might not be procurement data, but they're data analysts at heart, and they're able to probably give you more value than someone with a procurement background, really leading this particular project. So yeah, I would say look at the expertise needed to actually handle data and then teach procurement because that's teachable. And that's how you get, I think, the best talent to actually manage your data operations.
I'd say that the need to bring a data scientist depends on maturity of your organization and the quality of data. From my practical perspective, in one of my teams, I had the team of 12 analysts and data analysts, and all they were working with data. And because there was large enough spend that we needed the big group of analysts, and they actually created. I don't think they had extensive procurement background, but at least half of them knew something about procurement, and they had created significant infrastructure on how data is measured, how it's standardized, how it's cleaned, how it's turned into reports, how to make it consistent, and all of that. But what was interesting is that we also had, as part of that team, initially when I just joined the organization, we had a person who had PhD in data and was hired specifically by the previous leader to do predictive analytics, to do dynamic pricing, to do all of those fancy things. And the person had been extremely frustrated because it's kind of like, how can I? Like she was in her every proposal, in her every attempt, she was pushing the organization towards something that we had a major gap between basics and very advanced. It's like if you take a second grader and you put them in, geometry class and you say, you figure it out. It's not possible. But as we've progressed and, she eventually left the organization, and our conversation was that you are so awesome at what you do. We're just not ready for you yet. Can we call you back in 5 years? Right. And so I think that times are coming for procurement to have data scientists as part of their team. But I certainly believe that having data analysts, people who understand how to create the foundation for organization to operate from the same sheet of music. I think it's very important.
I'm often asked from people that are starting into procurement and supply chain what they can do to be successful. And I think back to the early steps, and this is just kind of what really helped me a ton, is there was a guy, I think his name was Scott, in my first at Intel. First month I was there, anytime I wanted spend data, I had to go to Scott, because Scott was the only one that could run the query in the mainframe to get the data out and the 20 steps to get it into a spreadsheet. And I made a personal decision at that moment that I'm going to be a data person. Like, I'm not going to rely on that person in order to get the data and be able to use the data. So, I do think that these analyst teams are really important. But if I was to give practical advice to anybody at a leadership level all the way down, is now more than ever, you need to be in love with data. Like, you can't be, the mobile first kind of, or the AI first, or the digital first. Like, there's all these first kinds of things. I think they're kind of in some ways working against people being data natives, because we're now layers away from, we have people, we have AI, we have other things that are taking us further and further away from really being in love with the raw data. Like, that would be my advice. Don't let that happen. Like, be the person, even if you don't, like, because you're in senior jobs and you don't have time to get in, you're not running those reports anymore. Don't stop speaking that language, and stay in love with the data. I think it's going to make a huge difference. And it plays into all these things, right? If you're leadership level, you're going to prioritize data hygiene projects that clean up and create clean data. You're going to assign somebody to work with the governance team on the data lake to make sure that stuff, it works all the way across the leadership stack, and it continues to be very, very important.
It does. You got to be the sponsor as the CPO of the data initiative, just like you said, Conrad. Like show interest, show enthusiasm, show importance to whoever the person in your team is leading that data project, right? And then really try and understand what it is that they're doing. Look at the spreadsheets with them. Look at the lists of suppliers and contracts and objects and etc. Together. But I think that's a great point to end on, Conrad. So yeah, no, it's been a great discussion around data. I have a feeling we'll have another one pretty soon. But yeah, I hope our listeners enjoyed it. Thank you, Natasha, Conrad, as always.